Well, welcome everybody to another Faith in Marriage Today. My name is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and
I'm Jason Angelette.
Right over there on that side of the screen, wherever we're at, right there. That's awesome. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, brother. Good to be with you, man. This is awesome. Got a great conversation today. I'm looking forward to it. A good friend of yours, Dr. Carlos, will be on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation to get into something I think is very appropriate, timely, something that we should all be reflecting on, and I'm sure we're already thinking about. But hopefully this conversation today will help foster even deeper conversations and more insights.
Amen. Amen. Well, speaking of Dr. Carlos Gomez, we're going to get him on the call. Carlos, what's going on, man? How's Miami?
Doing all right, Mario. How are you doing, Jason? Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, brother. Thank you so much for being with us, and it's the great work that y'all been doing together. A lot on the podcast with Always Hope, and you can see a lot of their videos, guys. If y'all go onto our Facebook page, you go onto the YouTube channel on Dr. Mario's podcast, Always Hope. You got some great resources. They have had some great conversations together. So I'm looking forward to kind of expanding that conversation, and particularly to the topic that we have today, particularly with this coronavirus quarantine and getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah, so the place where I'd like to begin for both of you today is I want to start by sharing a story. So this weekend, we went to Walmart for the first time. We've gone to Mass the past couple weekends, which has been an experience, of course, wearing masks, hand sanitizing our hands prior to receiving communion. The whole bit's been a little bit unsettling. But going to Walmart this weekend for the first time with my 12-year-old, I've gone by myself, and Kristen has gone to Sam's Club and kind of divvied up the groceries. But going with one of my children, honestly, was a little alarming. So we went because Monday was my 10-year-old son's birthday, so I wanted to take the 12-year-old to come and help me get some last-minute gifts and some other things. So we literally were walking up and down the store, going to get a present over here, going to get some grocery items over here, and walking up and down. And honestly, half the people had masks on, half the people didn't. Nobody was social distancing. Everybody was crammed into the aisles. Our Walmart didn't have little aisle markers or lines telling people where to go or where not to go. So it was just like business as usual. And Isaac, my 12-year-old, did a great job not touching anything, kept his hands to himself. He didn't look at any toys, didn't touch anything. But for me, even the experience afterwards, honestly, it made me feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. And I know if I experience that, I imagine other parents, we're all dads here, are experiencing similar things about, okay, well, what's enough? What's too much? Should we be bringing our kids back out to Walmart, to the grocery stores, or should we not? And so I just wanted to kind of start there about what you think, Carlos, with regards to bringing your children to the store or just even managing their anxiety or our anxiety as we're kind of entering into or have entered into this reopening phase of the economy. What do you think, bro?
Well, the first thing is, one of the things we know is that our minds as people, we look for coherence. We look for things to be consistent, right? And one of the things that's really just upsetting is that there's complete lack of coherence. I was talking to somebody just 2 days ago, and I was saying, the reality is that nothing has changed. I mean, there's no evidence that this virus is any, in other words, that there's no vaccine, there's no mitigation, and it seems like we've gone from one extreme to, I agree with you. I mean, I do get out to do some exercise, and just seeing the complete other extreme where people are acting as if nothing has happened. I mean, I saw, pretty alarming, a party with a jump house with a bunch of kids in it.
Oh my.
So I think it's a really complicated matter. And I think the issue as parents, so I'm talking to you, I'm a psychologist, but I'm a father of 5 children, 3 teens, a tween, and a 6-year-old. Mm-hmm. And what's really hard also is, how do we manage, in other words, we want to protect our kids, but we also want to make our kids stronger, right?
Right.
So how do we manage risk? Because the thing is, I was thinking about the vaccine. In psychology, we have a term which is inoculation. So there's ways where, just like if you keep your kid from ever getting sick, it's, or ever having access to germs, they're not going to develop an immune system. Likewise, psychologically, there's a balance always, which is, what's called resiliency, or the ability to overcome difficulty, overcome challenges, and not to develop other problems. And that's where I think, for me, the challenge is, how do I balance knowing what is too much on one end, what's too much on the other end, particularly when I can't rely anymore on external information, because it seems like it seems like a really bad movie. There's no coherence at all. So I'll pose that.
Yeah.
Speaking of movies, I couldn't help but think when this kind of started happening, the Aviator, the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. You remember that scene where when they do these flashbacks when he was a little boy, and it was during this I forgot what was going on, but his mom was there and he had to like get real clean, wash his hands, and he was like spelling quarantine, and then they used that as a flashback, and then they fast forward it to as an adult, and throughout the movie he's getting these like panic attacks. He's going back into the bathroom, his own little bar of soap, and he's washing his hands so hard that like he ends up like breaking the skin, and he can't touch doors. It's like this. Anyway, it might be an extreme, but the point is that like how are we processing these things, especially the kids, when we go into like these kinds of scenarios where I remember bringing my 13-year-old to the store and we were wearing masks, and she told me we were getting in the car and she's like she just felt like this sense of anxiety over her just seeing people wearing all these masks when that's not something that we normally see. And so there's a kind of an unsettling sense about it. And I guess as a parent, as a father, right, I'm trying to figure out like how can I talk to my kids about these types of things so that I can kind of not say, look, don't, there's nothing behind the curtain, don't look over there, but at the same time not get to the point of like making them so anxious that they then, this becomes a scarring moment. I mean, we're going to have challenges, but the question is that how do we embrace this challenge to not be something that's going to capsize the boat, right? Not going to be something that's going to be so intense that it's going to scar us as a family.
Jason, I love your comment the boat, because that has been, and Mari and I have talked about from the very beginning, has been a metaphor that continues to apply for us right now, because that's exactly it. I mean, it's like being on the boat in a storm. And if any boaters, you'll go out, it's sunny, then it's especially in Florida where I live, you'll have a horrible storm, and 2 minutes later, again, it's sunny again. So there's only so much predicting you can have going forward. But so that's a great question. I mean, how do we balance keeping our children safe? And it's not just the children safe, because the reality is that there's very few cases that we know of where kids have really gotten sick. I mean, we're talking about, compared to the number of infections we've had talking about a very small number. But my concern, I know, we all have large families, is becoming a vector of getting somebody else sick. So that's part of the issue, is how do we manage that? How do we balance that? And again, going back to, and I think there's a mourning. I mean, I'm personally mourning. The idea of being having to wear a mask to go places is just, I mean, really, it's, the reality is that, we don't know how long this is going to go for. And I think it's a mourning of a life that we knew that doesn't appear to be going to be the same for a bit, and we see our kids growing up and seeing that, and again, it's not knowing, it's not having, parenting is always a not knowing, but at least we can rely on other people to help us through it.
Right.
But nobody's been through this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let me speak to that, I think, a little bit here. Anxiety comes a lot from the unknown. I think a lot of us, of course, struggle with control or not knowing what to do in the face of anxiety. And when this thing came up, Carlos, you talked about kind of reference point. You're right. We have no point of reference for something like this before. I mean, anybody who lived...
And we recorded that. Remember, we recorded like a couple days after this started, Yeah,
I mean, like, listen, nobody we know was alive during the 1918, Spanish flu, which could have been when, that situation was what happened with regards to the Aviator. But so there isn't any sort of reference point for this for us, because in many ways we feel like we were beyond this. Like, the plague happened when whatever it happened, and the influenza happened whenever, Spanish fever happened whenever. But those things were kind of in the history books and aren't things that we had to deal with now. So we've been surprised by that. And I think rightfully so, a lot of anxiety has happened. But I think now that we're a couple months into this and more information has kind of arisen from this, we're able to get a better sense as to like how actually people are contracting it. And so the CDC now recently put out a more updated kind of guidelines and saying that when it comes to kind of grocery shopping, really people aren't contracting this by touching the Lego box or even the apple, fruit, whatever, and then getting it that way. That the way that when they're starting to see with contact tracing, that people are getting it by being in close quarters with individuals who have it. And you're thinking about choir practice, churches, or
Mhm.
even, of course, facilities for elderly, hospitals,
Mhm.
the meat packing plants. I think Jason and I, we were talking about that earlier, where people are kind of packed in there, working close proximity. Those are the
Mhm.
type of places where people are really kind of getting this. And so I
Mhm.
know that more information helps to alleviate anxiety, because what it does is it doesn't make this thing be so,
Mysterious.
yeah, I think that's a good word. Yeah, mysterious, or exactly nebulous, or we don't have our minds kind of wrapped around it. But when we're able to kind of get a better sense, okay, like what are the real risks? Because once we have understanding of what the real risks are, then we can
Right.
make better decisions for ourselves and for our families.
Right.
Once we have better data, what do you think, Carlos?
No, I think you're right on. So the reality is that one of the things is that when you look at if you look at some of the what do you call this, infectious disease people, if you look at the way the models they have, what they did is they went in they have different levels. If you have an outbreak somewhere, you try to isolate that outbreak. If that outbreak, if you can't, if you can't isolate it, then you're trying to in some ways try to contain the area. And then once there's widespread community infection, they go into really lockdowns, which is the mitigation process. So the reality is that that's kind of where we are there. But one of the things that's helpful for me to think about, especially when I start feeling overwhelmed,
Hmm.
and this is something that both kind of applies to both Miami and the folks in your area in New Orleans.
Right.
And that is the concept. We talk about hurricanes, right? So if you have a tropical storm coming through town and you're in a shelter that is strong, that is built up to, let's say, a category 3 or 4 hurricane,
Right.
it's uncomfortable. You might lose power, but there's a sense of protection. There's a sense of lower risk, right?
Right.
And I'm not sure if this is the way we want to go or not, but I mean, the reality is we can look at there's things we can't change. We can't change what ordinance is going to be passed and who's fighting with who and how political it is and everything else. What
Correct.
we can do is say, how can I make my family stronger? Because the reality is this: as difficult as wearing a mask is, if mom or dad if there's a sense of protection in the home, the sense where mom and dad can take care of me, there's a sense of my family is okay. We see that particularly, we talk about World War II, the reality that so many men were gone off to war, right? And the question is, you also hear maybe is romanticized, but you talk also great regeneration. So great struggles also produce great character. So the question sometimes is, what can we do? First of all, to make these decisions, which are tough, when we can look at, but also what can we do to keep our family strong and ourselves strong to combat that which we can't control? And Mario and Jason, it's up to you. Those are some directions we can take this even.
That's the thing, right? Is to see that this isn't God's bigger than this, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's something that we try to talk to the kids a lot about too, because I mean it's a little different too in our home because my wife is stage 4 breast cancer, right? So she's in that immunocompromised group
Sure.
that we need to be taking some extra precautions
Mhm.
to make sure that she's okay, right? And it's and we can quickly look at it, and going back to the whole storm analogy, like we can, as like Peter stepping out on the boat, right? Like you can easily see the magnificent waves and the crashing sounds and see the lightning, and just it kind of takes your focus. And then what happened when Peter did that? He started to sink. But in the middle of our storms, if we can, as my wife loves to say, glance at the problems but gaze at Jesus, if we can just keep our eyes on him this time and just realize, like, look, we can get through this, and this isn't, we should not lose our hope in all of this. I love, that's why I keep going back. I think Mario's podcast is a brilliant name, Always Hope, because no
Yes.
matter how dark the night gets, no matter how rampant the virus is around us, we should never lose hope. I mean, we're going to experience challenges, but we got to see the hope in the situation, and look to the fact that look at the past. We've gone through so many things, and we are resilient people, thanks be to God. And so we pray for the cure, we pray for those who have it, but we should not lose hope. We should not forget about that great gift that we have in our faith to give us the strength even in times where it's so mysterious or so big and complicated that we can't wrap our brain around it, because there's going to be a lot of things we can't wrap our brain around.
Yeah, absolutely right. So and that's a key, especially is even talk to the family. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. The reality is that we don't know what's going to happen anyway. I mean, so
That's right.
it's a reality that we're facing at any time, right?
So, Carlos, what type of conversations are you having with your kids? I know you said that you hit the gamut with regards to teenagers, preteens, and the little one. How are you managing these conversations with each
Right.
of them?
So great. So the first conversation we had was initially, we went into lockdown a little earlier than other people did, and it was the idea of responsibility, and looking out for the good for the other, and the concept, I have never really been concerned about my kids getting sick through this individually, but I have been obviously aware of a sense of, we can't be reckless and we have to make decisions. So, taking opportunity out of it. One of the things, it's not true, but they talk about how, uh, the crisis is both it is true actually, but the crisis both gives us a danger and an opportunity, right? So how we take that opportunity. Conversations that I've been noticing, and we have to be aware of also, is that for kids, they adolescents live in a day by day, week by week reality, right? So whatever happened last week was so last week. Was so, that's when I was little. You hear it. It's always this idea.
Absolutely
So
true.
part of it is really keeping an eye on the kids to see how they're coping.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to, I was preparing a presentation to talk about what to look out. And I looked at one of my kids was actually struggling. One of my kids was, I was concerned, was getting, more, kind of rude, more explosive, things that I've never seen before. My first thought is there's influences that we're not managing. Well, the reality is that this is a very socially active kid, and not having gone outside for a while was beginning to really get to this child's emotional life. So that's another thing. A third thing to talk about has really been how this is an opportunity to be together, and the reality for our family, especially, is that 10, 15 years from now, we'll probably spend 6 months planning how to be together for 2, 3 days, and we have this opportunity to be together now.
That's right.
But even a bigger thing that I try to talk to the kids has been about also how self-care. I've talked to them how my kids run cross country, and I know Mario, you did cross country as well. I talked about the idea of summer training. If you see people who in Florida, cross country season is cruel. It's from August to like October.
I hated running in July in South Florida. It was the worst.
Yeah, but the thing is,
Worst.
those people who are out sweating, those poor souls, who are out sweating in July and are miserable, are the ones who are picking up the medals, at the end of the season.
That's right.
So the question I talk to my kids has been, how can you turn this time into something? I have a child who's actually learning French. The kids are all beginning to train for cross country on their own. We're fortunate to have a treadmill at home. But how do you make this time? Because the reality is that this is going to end. So if you're in a storm, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm in an airplane and we start getting turbulence, I start getting nervous, and I have to picture, okay, at some point we're going to land.
Right.
You have to kind of have that hope in the day out from this. So that's another conversation we're having. One that we had recently. So last week, my kids convinced me to get out with a couple of groups, and these are really good kids, to go out and do some exercise together at a local university. We went ahead and let them do it. I had mixed feelings about it, but we talked about, you understand that this means that you will not see your grandfather. You realize that after this, we're going to have to quarantine. After you do this, we're going to have to basically quarantine you, make sure you're okay before you, so that was a hard decision. And then with the most recent things coming out, the reality was this was not it's over for us. This was an opportunity for you to see if the world continues, but we are going to continue in a level of lockdown for a bit longer. So the reality that what applies today may not apply tomorrow, but I try to include the kids in the decision making. I try to have them also involved in that mitigation. I don't know if that's of any help or not.
No, that's great. I love the idea too. Like you said, like keeping tabs on them. Like, don't just think that last week they were doing fine, and so then it just goes to reason that then this week everything's going to be fine. That they're day to day sometimes, and we do need to kind of check in on them and just see, hey, so how are things going, or if there was something going on, to kind of really just take that time investing in that relationship and just being attentive to those little nuances that may pop up here and there. And sometimes, for us, I know I can see it. Sometimes things come out sideways pretty much when that happens, there's something underneath all of that that's going on. It's not that, the sibling kicked the other sibling or yelled or shouted or whatever, did something. There's something else, some angst that you need to work out through. And I love too the idea, like you said, about seeing this as like an opportunity. I mean, this can't be just like we just sit there and we just wait and just continue to watch shows on Netflix. Like, this has to be something that we've got a time, an opportunity to grow in our relationship with each other, to grow in our relationship with God, to learn new things, to go out there, to exercise, to get the body moving, to do these types of things. So this isn't a waste. This is, in so many ways, I see this, and again, I'm sorry for those. I pray for those who are affected by this, who've lost jobs. But if you just look at the positive and say, look, where are the things that we can do now? And there are some great gifts that we are receiving at this time. And I know sometimes it's hard, but you look at what we have, we've been given an abundance of time for a lot of us. Like we definitely don't have the scheduled summer that we normally would have already. We don't have all the camps lined up. We're not going out, to do all these things because a lot of these things aren't happening. And if they are, there's only a few of them. So the question is that instead of just saying like, well, this summer's a wash, like, well, no, what can we do? What's another thing? Let's think out of the box. And especially when it comes to what are the things that's most important, our faith, our family, and the health of our relationships.
And that's a great point. One of the things to mention is with checking on your kids, it doesn't mean you show up with a checklist, right? How do you sleep last night? But rather, what I do find is tough is because we're together so much and we're, I'm working, a lot of us are working, doing different things. We can actually be under the same roof and not spend a lot of one-on-one time, not spend that time when, to be able to just fool around, find something that you can do together to interact. And that's something that I constantly try because I have a million projects I want to work on. And the nice thing about being, when I'm in my office now, but when I'm home, I'm not driving kids all over the place. I'm not, there is in other ways more time. But Jason, you make, and you make great points. I mean, there is reasons to be upset about. I mean, there are people who've lost family, people who've lost jobs. I mean, there's a lot of things to be upset about. Again, including the changes in our lives that we're facing, including what we had hoped our kids would have. But a point that you make, and I really like, when you talk about think out of the box, and I think that's crucial at all times. I know I love movies. Sounds like you love movies. I know Mario loves movies.
Yep.
I tell my kids, nobody's inspired by the ordinary.
Right.
Nobody's inspired by the person who does things every other way. So it's an opportunity also to explore. I know our youth group here. They have a youth group and it meets on Wednesday nights, and then they break on. A couple of churches got together, then they break up into different youth groups. Well, I have a child that goes visits a different youth group every week. And I'm like, that's a great idea. What are some things? One of the beautiful things when it comes to the proofs of God, right? I've gone through the philosophical proofs of God. A lot of them I have a hard time with just logically because they seem to. I'm not trained enough, but the one that has really made a difference in my life is seeing that God can bring such good out of bad things. Yes. And I think that's a crucial thing in this, is things are bad. But also, in some of the, it's the best of times, the worst of times. There are, especially when we connect with a bigger purpose, when we try to grow in our faith, when we try to communicate and try to listen and try to see things with the eyes of God. And the beautiful thing, this is not theology, because God is desperate to, I don't say desperate, but God really wants to connect with us.
Yes.
So in our own way, there's an opportunity to do that. And then we start finding hope, we start finding opportunities, and I think that's, I don't know, Mario, you're a hope, you're a hope man. Yeah. Talk to us about hope.
Well, it's funny that you say that. It's like Ellen DeGeneres once said that, at the end of her show, she always says, be kind. And so she kind of feels like she's the kindness person now.
Yeah.
And so she can't be mean or rude to anybody because she's the kindness person.
Mario's the hope guy.
Yeah, I guess I'm the hope guy, but that means that, I guess I have my moments as well as anybody else, of course. So we started the conversation.
Moments, how can you be the hope guy, right? If you have hope, it's adversity, right?
Well, yeah, I
So
mean, but honestly,
if you don't
sometimes
have
I
your
feel,
moments, how are you gonna have hope? You know.
well, that's what Chesterton said. Chester said that hope is a virtue that's only exercised in hopeless situations. I mean, that's just what it is. You know, you can't feel hope when you're all happy. But there are times where honestly, I feel there's a great scene in we talk about movies. We're talking about the Lord of the Rings before we went on air. Great scene from the Return of the King where Aragorn says, you know, I feel like I give hope to everybody else, but I'm losing it for myself. You know, that there's sometimes there's challenge in all of that. But bringing this back to, you know, anxiety and kind of what we started this conversation, we really have a couple more minutes here. We talked about self-care as a good place to start with conversations that we can have with our kids. Then we also spoke about what does it mean to manage risk. And so that means that you have to be, as parents, informed with regards to what the real risks are and being able to make calculated risks. So that means in terms of going out to the grocery store. That also means about planning your own summer vacations and what you want that to look like. Mm-hmm. When you're going to wear masks, when you're not going to wear masks. All of those become calculated risks that you can make if you are well informed, so that you can minimize.
I'm interrupt you, but the word calculated risk, I really wanted to emphasize that in case somebody missed it. It's calculated risk. We can't avoid, everything's a risk, but how do you manage that risk? Sorry, Dr. Mario. Just wanted to just make that comment.
No, bro, you got it. That's it. I mean, exactly. It's all calculated risk, and so there's not going to be anything here has a risk. You're going to go out, it has a risk. So it's just whether or not you're calculating it appropriately. But the reality is, like we said earlier, there's no certainty in anything. So there's risk no matter what we do. I mean, I think even going back to Lord of the Rings, I think Bilbo says that to Frodo, says the scariest thing you could do is step outside the door. I mean, just starting that path towards adventure is going to be difficult no matter what happens. So recapping, self-care, managing risk, having some sense of calculated risk. And the last thing that we really spoke about so beautifully is inviting our kids to a sense of prayer in relationship with the Lord in the midst of all this, and recognizing that God in his providence is allowing us to live in this moment of history and that we are experiencing this. And so to not let this be some type of traumatic experience so that our kids don't grow up to be the next Howard Hughes, you know, where they can't scrub their hands clean, you know, for the next 60 years. But trying to anchor even their fear and anxiety and recognizing that there's some reality to it, there's reason for it rather, but even in the reason and the rationale for the fear that they have, that the Lord is still bigger than the storm, as Jason loves to say. Amen. And that God has a plan and purpose in our lives in the midst of all the challenges that we face. And Carlos, as you said, one of the greatest proofs of God is that he can make all things good, that he can use any experience for our salvation. And so those are the lessons that we want to continue to teach our kids and check in with them as regularly as possible. So we're coming to the end of our time. Carlos, we really appreciate you being with us. It's been a sincere pleasure. God bless you, man. Jason, any final thoughts?
This was a great conversation. I hope everyone watching was blessed by it. I know I was, just being a part of it. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Carlos, and we look forward to having you back on at some point in the future.
All right. God bless everybody. Take care.
Take care.